It's Freedom Friday, and you are still not free, but hopefully you'll be freer after an hour with Sharif El Mekki and me. This is Freedom Friday, and you are still not free. What's up, people? It is Friday once again. Sharif El Mekki, Citizen Steward in the house. We are um, having a great time kind of in charter school week, and we want to talk about that today. First, I got to apologize to people. I am in my parents' basement, just so if you wonder how the surroundings have changed, I am in well, I was going to say Washington, D.C. Actually, I'm in Maryland, to be honest with you.
Mm,
And to be very honest with you, I'm in Maryland. I'm not in Maryland. I'm a little
Maryland,
further up. Yeah, I'm in
Maryland.
Maryland. Um, just so you know.
That's what's up.
Sharif, how you doing, brother?
Good, doing well, man. Good to see you. Good to
And
see
you've been
you.
doing some traveling
Welcome
this
back.
week.
Yeah, man. It was past 2 months. Seems like it's been, how sometimes you wake up, you're like, wait a minute, where am I
Where am
going
I?
and where am
Yes.
I? And so got a little bit of that. So great to be home and get a little bit back into the routine. Um, my
Well,
kids are
looks
going
good.
camping this weekend, so I'll
Oh,
be able to
wow.
kind of just, recalibrate and everything. So yeah.
You're going to have to start a black camping blog, a black
Hmm.
naturist blog, and highlight all these things. I know one person who might be watching, I don't know if she is, Shantae Barnes
Mm. In
in
Indy.
Indianapolis is a
Yeah.
gardener. And
Yeah, she's a serious gardener. I
she's
mean,
serious. She started
yeah,
doing
sometimes she'll
writing about
post
it.
the things. I'm like, oh man, I need to step my green thumb game
See,
up.
I don't say that when I watch it, but I like living vicariously through y'all.
Through
Like
it, right?
I watch you, you out there with the beekeeping and all that stuff, and I'm like thinking to myself, it is so nice to watch
Yeah, bro,
that.
it's a black birder out here in Philadelphia that I've been trying to catch up with. We message each other every once in a while because I do like amateur. I got my binoculars, I got that,
Mm.
but he's like out like looking for birds. The other day he was complaining he was looking for warblers. He could only see catbirds, and a couple people were just like, "What's a catbird and what's a warbler?" And I was just laughing. I'm like, "Yeah, they might not know, but."
That
Yeah,
sounds
yeah,
like a fictional cartoon character,
yeah.
Catbird. Um, well, speaking of things that are off the beaten path,
Mm,
so you are a naturist and you do naturist things. Shantae Barnes, who I just mentioned, is somebody who I just think is a very unique person. I love to have these people in my network. She does gardening. Um, I have a friend that you know and that I know in this education work and education world who's all into Bitcoin and
mm,
African development.
mhm,
I have a couple of Afro-futurist friends. There are just so many ways to be a person of color, to be Black in America. And one of those ways in education that we are going to talk about this week is chartering your own course, chartering
mhm.
your own path in education. And by that, I
What
mean
a concept.
chartering a school.
Mhm,
You can go to schools that are made for you and designed for you if you want to. And if you believe in and trust in those systems that created those schools for you, God help you and good for you. But all the way back to Lucy Laney in the 1800s, who got the very first charter in the state of Georgia to start a school for Black students where there were none, um, and someone who created a school that survived into the 1970s. Um, Black people have
amazing.
been chartering their own course. They have been creating schools and pedagogy, curriculum, very specifically to serve the needs of the kids that they believed were being underserved by the state, by their counties, by their government, by their school boards. This isn't new to us. And we've talked about this so many times before. I just need people to know the history. All the way back to the 1800s and going all the way through now, Black people have been either talking about or creating or building or investing in schools where they charter their own course and they make their own charters. What we know as charter schools didn't come about until 1992 in law in Minnesota and then nationally. But
Mhm.
previous to that, people like Kenneth Clark had already kind of pitched the idea in 1968, and all throughout the 1970s, Black people were experimenting with different versions of how they could have either public private, or private schools that serve the needs of Black students. So I just want to use that as a backdrop for us to talk about this. Today is
It's a
Charter Week.
great
A
backdrop.
bunch of Black folks came to, and actually, I should just say Black folks. A bunch of people came to Washington D.C. to tell President Biden that his new regulations that are meant to be like a nuisance set of rules against charter schools to back off our schools.
A noose and a nuisance, You're trying to strangle, you know?
Uh, so you choosing violence right away.
Yeah, man. It's we ain't, as you said, we ain't new to this. We've been true to this for a long, long time. You mentioned Lucy Craft Laney and some of her, you know, just intellectual, sisters and descendants, right? Whether
Mhm,
it's Bethune Cookman, that eventually becomes a college, and
mhm,
place of learning. Stories in California of Black women starting schools out there in the middle of just rabid racism, and just saying like, hey, we're gonna start this, to the independent Black schools movement, right? Like, it has always been a an important part of, talking about doing it for the culture. Ain't nothing like doing it
mhm.
for the culture than educating the next generation. It ain't nothing. Like, you can do all the dancing and the clapping and the shoes wearing, hat fixing, for all of that. Like, fine, beautiful. You know what I mean? But ain't nothing like doing it for the culture, like educating our youth, educating the next generation, guaranteeing the survival of the next generation. You do that through schools, right? And
So
so
where's the there's a disconnect though.
a big disconnect.
So the disconnect when we talk about these schools, people hear charter school, and first of all, they hear a whole host of political things.
Hmm.
The moment you say that word, those two words together,
Hmm.
all this political talk, siphoning money off from traditional public schools, an attempt to destroy traditional public schools, political ploy of the right to, destroy democratic education, whatever. It is so easy for some of our progressive friends, especially the highly educated progressive friends who benefited from being on the little islands of privilege in the traditional system, who have such a large affection for that system, to go completely a different direction when they hear charter school. Their whole frame and narrative for it is different than what you just said. You just said they're doing it for the culture. There's nothing more doing it for the culture than taking the sole responsibility for educating your young and deciding for yourself what that's going to look like, right? Um, where do you think the disconnect is? What is the disconnect?
Yeah, I mean, I think one big part of it is this one, a misunderstanding what democratic education is, what democracy is, and who's actually, been democratized. Like, what's been democratized in a way that has wholly benefited us. Even when it looks like it, there's massive compromise or suffering that we'll eventually peel out and figure out, right? And sometimes we know it right from the very beginning. So I think that's one part. Like, it's just this, hijacking language, conflating different things. And so, the whole idea of like, oh, democratic education, that's what we're protecting. And then you look at the results of this so-called democratic education for Black children, and no matter what, not only just the data, but even just the pathological mindsets that people have about Black children is absolutely, ridiculous.
Mm,
So it's like one group has benefited from it in this, one singular way, where that's not the results that most people get. And I think
mhm,
it's also this idea, as much as they talk trash about the right, Trump and others, weaponizing language. This
mhm,
is part and parcel, part of their theory and attempts to, right? Like, they're like, oh, Same way that they made, Rufo made CRT toxic, they want to
Mhm,
make the idea of, charter toxic without thinking about, what does it actually mean,
mhm,
and so that's what I
yeah.
see a lot. That's what I see a lot.
So this on this point about weaponizing language and conflating things, the word democratic, I believe in democratic education. I believe in the idea in a pluralistic society and a very diverse world, just in general, that there must be democracy in education so that you don't have one group hostily taking over the apparatus that trains everybody's kids. So, for instance, right now we have a white nationalist attempt to take over school systems and to cut out people of color, ethnic studies, the study of injustice done to non white peoples, all of that, to
Mhm.
remove that. So, what they are fighting for is a very undemocratic way of doing education. They're fighting for a single national story that is told through the lens of Eurocentrism that keeps them at comfort and keeps everybody else's grievances at bay.
Mhm.
That's undemocratic. Likewise, though, when people of different cultures are attempting to start culturally affirming schools for their own children, because the main one best system has been historically systemically racist at every level,
Every level.
at every level. The teaching, the learning, the curriculum, the zoning, the how you get into schools, how you get into special programs, the sorting of students. It is a blueprint for racism. So it's a left-wing blueprint for racism. So we have
Mhm.
two. We have a right wing and a left wing blueprint for how you control
What
ethnic
Malcolm
people.
say, left wing, right wing, same bird. It's the
Same bird,
same damn bird.
same bird. And the more they flap at each other, the more that bird flies.
Oh yeah.
Right? Right? So let's
I'm
just be
mad.
clear with
I'm
each other.
mad. That
Yeah,
joint
oh,
just moving.
oh, oh. And then we pick one of the wings and we think, "Oh my god, I'm on the right wing, and I'm on
Yeah,
the
yeah.
left wing," and blah, blah, you flapping, you're like, "You damn fool. You're helping the
Uh,
white supremacy bird fly." What you need to do is land that bird, get off of it, and start your own schools and start your own kind of control of the intellectual development process of your children so that you can take them out of the steeping. They are being steeped like tea bags in colonial white supremacist thought, even without knowing it, on the right and the left, right?
yeah.
So this conflating of democratic to me is a problem. We have to like talk about what would be more democratic than all kinds of peoples having schools in which they take care of their young's intellect, the intellect of their youth. Um, we have examples that I have talked about before in Mexico and in New Zealand and other places where indigenous people have thrown off the yoke of their colonial kind of government and they have retaken education back for themselves.
Yeah.
So if people want to look at this, you should look at the Zapistas in Mexico and the Maori
Hey,
people in
Maori.
New
Hmm.
England, or I'm sorry,
New
New
Zealand.
Zealand,
Hmm.
and use them as case studies of what it takes for people to overturn their colonial education and reclaim themselves. So people like you worked in a school in Philadelphia where the aim of that school, and it was a charter, the aim of that school was to turn things around for kids that had been miseducated for years in Philadelphia. That's a story that repeats itself.
Hmm.
Many other places. Why do you get lost in the conversation as
Yeah.
we're talking about billionaires and education?
I mean, it's crazy. I mean, I think a big part of it is just brainwashing, Chris. I mean, there's some folks who are just absolutely seriously brainwashed to one, not understand, what it means, and we even tell our youth, like lead classrooms, lead schools, start schools. Like that's the messaging that we're telling them. If you can't, and we talked about it on Eight Black Hands and on this show, can't start a school yet, start after school program, start a tutoring club, start a math club, and just keep growing, keep touching. Each one teach 1,000. And when you talk about like the school that I led for 11 years, that was in the same neighborhood that I grew up in, a school that I went to, that I knew for generations, like that generationally, it struggled to serve the community in a righteous way, in a educationally just way, in an equitable way. Then we also saw that the same, I have friends who were like out in the streets who were like protesting, injustices. And they, they would look at me sideways like, but yes, oh Mickey, but you're in that charter school. And I would say, some of the same people that are on those posters that you're hanging up, you're walking down the street with a poster of a woman who comes to my school and tells me, you know what? I used to live across the street from this school, and my mother refused to put me in here. Now, this is decades ago. The woman that you're walking around, like with a banner and fighting for because her rights have been violated so inhumanely. She's telling you, my mother opted out. So you're talking about like 3 generations ago. Yet you're more loyal to what her parents opted her out of than to what the concept of was for this black woman, this black child to be her intellectual development to be looked at as the absolute highest priority. And so the school I was in was a turnaround school. So it
Mm.
wasn't even just like starting up or is across the street and we're like, oh, we're going to compete right in the same, like, no, it was none of that. It was turn this school around, same kids, same neighborhood, same families, different expectations, different adults, and wildly different results.
Hmm. And I saw, like, in visiting that school, there's a graph that's on the wall that
Mm,
shows how the school was performing before the turnover or turnaround, and then how it was performing after the turnaround. It was like night and day. And I feel like that's a graph that people need to see nationally. People lie about the outcomes of charter schools. So let me just stop there and say,
oh yeah.
when you open up whether charter schools do better than traditional public schools, this is a main point of contention between people who support and don't support charters. I will say this much. I can find evidence of them doing the same, of them doing better, and of them doing worse. Of course, I can. Of course, you can, because that's the way that the world works. No one asked this question of magnet schools, really, very much. They don't ask this of urban schools. Do urban schools do better than suburban schools, for instance? And when they do, they only relate the differences to money, right?
Mm.
So, well, if they're doing more poorly, that means they need more money. So, in charter schools' case, if they're doing more poorly, maybe you should give them more money, right?
If you
Like,
follow, I mean,
you know?
most Americans have not taken a logic course, right?
Right.
They've not taken a
Wow.
logic
Yeah,
course.
that's
So
true.
I know growing up in Iran, that
Yeah.
was that was a course that you took because you should be able to look at things accurately and determine, oh, well, if I follow this step.
Yeah.
And right now, if everything, as you said, if a school struggles, they need more money. They're under
Right.
resourced. And I'm not arguing against that, although David Hardy be like, yo, some of y'all don't need more money, because he's just gonna piss it out the window the way that you're already
Right.
doing it. And it's also like how you spent it. But do the, same game. Apples to apples, then give more money.
Well, and that's what they when they say that charters aren't held to the same standard as traditional public
Tuh,
schools. First of all, that's always really funny
it's
because the
hilarious.
number of accountability factors that go into operating a charter school are so different than the traditional public schools where failure can be eternal, meaning you can just keep failing year after year in so many different ways. And no one is checking your books in the way that they check charter schools. And they're not going through the same process of being chartered and rechartered. So the held to the same standard. But if you want to hold them to the same standard, make sure they're getting the same amount of money, right? Because in a lot of places, charter schools are educating kids for less money than the traditional schools are getting. I'll give you one example. In Minneapolis, when Minneapolis passes referendums, they raise money on the head count of every young person in the city, whether that young person is going to a district school or a charter school. They raise money on the total head count, but they keep all of the money that is raised on the head count of the kids that go to charter schools. So they are raising money on the backs of kids that are in charters, and those kids in those charters don't get that money. But let me stop there because I want to go back a little bit to a point that you made about a woman in the neighborhood who was talking about the school that predated yours, who would never enroll her kid in that school, right?
Mhm.
It's always smart to come back to real people when we talk about these policies because only sociopaths take people out of policy discussions. Put people back in. And when we think about all of the families who are choosing charter schools every day for different reasons, not because they're political people, not because they want to have a debate about it, but because school A has a program or school B has some sort of opportunity or whatnot. They're moving their kid to that school. Um, the people who are against charter schools, this is what I would ask you. Does the parent who does that have the right to disagree with you? Do they have the right to disagree with you with their child? Do they have the right to choose a school that you don't like and to choose teachers that you don't like and to choose a opportunity? Because that's what we're talking about. We're not talking about whether you disagree with me on charters. That's not the disagreement. The disagreement is, do you have the right to look in the face of a person who's making a choice that's different than one you would want them to make and still be able to do it? Um, and Sharif, I bring that up because when I was with you in Philly, I saw real students. We sat in a room with real students. I saw how they were cared for. We talked to them directly. I saw how much they loved you. I saw how much they loved their educators and their school. And that's what's in my mind when I talk to the idle professor who's arguing with me about whether or not these schools are racist or they don't take everybody or they, somehow. And I know that that professor's never stepped foot one step in the shoes of the parent who has chosen that school.
Mhm. Yeah, 100%. I mean, and so often it's so far removed. And then you add the folks who are, in proximity, and they're carefully, methodically, as they should, as parents, as you call them, the CEO of their child's education, they are absolutely taking charge of it and finding ways to take ownership of it. And they play games like making sure that their child gets into that magnet school, or making sure that their child gets into that university assisted school, or making sure that their child gets into that gentrified neighborhood and or school, and at the same time thumbing their nose at other folks who can't do all this movement, can't get up and move or rent and all these kind of super expensive places, and saying like, what about this school? Can something be done about this school? My mother didn't want me here, and now she doesn't want her grandchild here. Is there anything that can be done? Because they don't mind you disagreeing with them as long as you can't act on that disagreement. And I think that's a really important point that you raise. They're fine with all this kind of removed, abstract theory of disagreement, because they would look at that as like, that's democracy. We get to disagree and da da da. But don't let me catch you exercising that disagreement. Don't let me catch you acting on that disagreement. I don't want to see people giving you the option to actually do something differently, right? And for some of the most
Hmm.
vehement people that have been against that, that would have shot sly slick remarks about the charters in Philadelphia, for example. They were leading magnet schools that were had some of the most racist just history and
Mm.
demographical situation. How is your school 80% white in a city that 80% of the other students of the other schools are black and brown? How, like, just tell me how do you fix your lips to then talk about who I'm who attends my school? And it was a neighborhood school, by the way, but just like, is so far removed from the actual realities of families, and I think that's the biggest part of the problem. Randy Weingarten used to come in here for photo ops, and yeah, we're not turning this into a charter. We're not doing this, and then she fly out, and then I'm asking, like, did she leave a plan to actually improve the school? Yeah, I hope that's what she brought when she flew when
Yeah.
she popped up in here. Did she leave something to help improve this school?
Yeah.
Nothing. Never. Never.
Well, and that's the whole thing is like, if not this, then what? So if you don't like charter schools and you want to cut off pathways of families and students to something that they obviously want, because they wouldn't be sitting on waiting lists in many places, or they wouldn't be enrolling in many places, or they wouldn't be moving their kids to these schools if it was something they didn't want. So you need to have as a progressive person, as a paleo liberal, you have to have a really strong justification for looking in the face of historically marginalized people and saying, no, no. I'm smarter than you. I'm not going to do with my kids what I want you to do. But I
Mm.
think what I want you to do is stay in these schools where my sisters are earning their pensions off of you. So I need you to stay there regardless of what you want, right? You need a justification to be able to do that.
Yeah, and Chris, and you know what? I think one of the most frustrating parts, for me, just as an educator, right? Like 26 years, quarter of a century in schools, leading classrooms, leading schools, only in neighborhoods. I was only in West and Southwest Philadelphia, right? So the
Mhm,
three schools I was in that quarter of a century time were all within, a mile or so, a couple miles. So many people who are, who have a problem with parents exercising some type of independence and self determination about their children, they actually have no real ideas about how to improve schools. They
mhm,
really don't.
mhm,
When you ask like some of the folks, if you see them and they're like, "Oh, I'm anti," what would you do to improve schools? They say they say more money.
mhm,
They say
mhm,
smaller class sizes. Some of them say get rid of the principals and the school board, like, just get rid of all of them. I'm just like, okay, you're telling me everything that you don't want to see. What would you actually do that would revolutionize the experiences of black and brown children? Look, here's the data.
mhm,
Here's the 13% that actually gets some type of post-secondary education. Here's the number who are actually reading on grade level. Like whatever you want to look at, whatever dashboard you want to
mhm,
look at,
mhm.
what would you actually do to improve schools? And I can tell you over and over and over again, when this question is asked, they can't give you a GD answer that makes sense, that's scalable, that is shown to work and that you can just do, right? Like it's like mind-boggling. And these are like smart people, right? Like they are like, oh yeah, I'm cultured, I'm sophisticated, I'm they don't know jack.
You know
They
what's so
don't know
funny about
jack.
that? One of the so I sent out a email blast about Charter School Week this week, and asking people to support our Back Off campaign, the campaign to, and when I say our, I mean charter school supporters, campaign to get people to back off of the regulations that Biden is passing
Mhm.
or trying to put in place that make it harder to expand or grow charter schools and charter schooling. And a professor wrote me and just immediately, like, had all the talking points of, this is neoliberalism, charter schools are an attack on the system, blah
Mhm.
blah 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 blah.
Mhm.
And when I pushed back on her, she was like, well, the people of color I know agree with me, and blah
I
blah
got
whatever.
black friends. I mean, that's the
I
typical.
have black friends.
Yeah, I got black friends,
I got
right?
black friends. But this is what's interesting. So let me just break this down for the people who are watching right now. Um, a lot of people came to Washington, D.C. this week to actually express their voice. People who are supportive of charters in this way. There were parents, there were educators, and there were students who came to say, hands off of my school, hands off of my opportunity, to make a show of it because um, the Biden administration has put into place what I called earlier nuisance rules, rules where you're just kind of bullying the charter sector. They can't shut them down completely. They've tried for years. They can't just pass laws to get rid of charter schools. They've tried that for years. So what they do, what all good kind of sociopaths do, is they whittle away at you little by little by little. So what the right does, for instance, like with Roe and others, is they can't get rid of abortion, so they whittle it down over time. It's a choice they don't want you to be able to make, and they don't want you to have the power to exercise it. So over time, they whittle it down. You can't get an abortion after a certain date, or you can't get it in this place or this location or in this way, or they start adding onerous kind of policy prescriptions to it. And that's what's happening with charter schools. They tried for years to get rid of it. They want to overturn it any way they can. They feel like they're very angry that it was put in law in the first place and that it became a law. So over time, they have just started kind of just trying to whittle and whittle and whittle it down. What they have done right now is they've made it harder to participate in the federal grant program that helps you start charter schools, which is super useful if you want to start a school in your area. Um, the people who are pushing that and did the biggest campaign on that are working with the Biden administration are the Network for Public Education, Diane Ravitch's group, Carol Burris, who leads
Carol
that
Bur
group, Jeff Bryant, who is a for-profit union-aligned media consultant who writes all of their stuff for them, and really works really hard to create public animosity towards charters and anything that the unions don't like.
You sound like
Eh,
Rufo, just the other
He's the
part of the
Christopher
bird.
Rufo. He's the Christopher Rufo of the left
Mhm.
when it comes to education. They try to poison the public mind around something that is basically benign. It's just an opportunity. Public school choice involves a lot of different kinds of schools, but they've picked this one out because it doesn't generate enough union dues, doesn't generate enough member dues. So that's why this is the end all be all for them. It's like 7% of students, but in their mind, it's like 90% of the problem of
Mhm.
everything. I'm only bringing this is my long-winded way of bringing all this up to say what you just I'm making a point akin to yours. Diane Ravitch, Carol Burris, the Network for Public Education, all of those people seem to represent education and educators. And they just had an entire conference in Philadelphia where they said nothing about teaching and learning and pedagogy and practice.
And Black
They would
student
have you
achievement,
believe
not a
that
single thing.
all of that is fine. All
Mhm.
you need is more money. More money for what? Why is it they talk so little about teaching, learning, pedagogy, practice, the things that are supposed to be that they're supposed to be experts on? Why did this professor who wrote me about charter schools, who runs a teacher prep program in her college, a traditional program, why would she have so little to say about actual teaching and everything to say about money? Where the money goes, who gets the money, what happens when you have a charter school, the money doesn't come to. She's in a union. Her Sisters of Mercy in the classroom are in a union. They have like a mothership union. They all have a very ISIS like clarity about what their war is. Their war is not about teaching and learning and about better educating kids. It's about stomping out anybody who dare. Kids better have my money. Anybody who takes away from union dues. I know that's a harsh way of putting it and saying it. I always take things too far, and I'm gonna keep taking things too far.
Kids better
So,
have my
but
money.
Sharif, I'm telling the good people that's not what you're saying. I'm just saying that's what I'm saying.
Listen. It is I mean, and that that whole idea, and again, I 100% agree with you. It is so much conversation about everything except teaching and learning, looking at actual, how are students, how are the children, as you say, and the mass eye's greeting is, and I can tell you, like there was this one clown that actually, and again, he's part of Carol Burris and Diane Ravage's, progeny, black guy. I asked him one day, okay, like what's your, what are you gonna do? You're now you're a union rep. Like you have a lot of power, a lot of influence. You have some decision making. Like you can actually center the students that you claim that are, not being educated in the charter. So what are you gonna do? Like what's the one thing that's your platform that you're gonna just literally shake up the system and change? He said, my platform is playgrounds at every school. And I thought he was joking at first.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I've nothing against playgrounds. So, I'm all about
Mhm.
kids playing. I'm all about recess and kids exercising and green space, like the works. And I'm like, okay, what else? No, that's it. That's what I'm going to take on. Every school needs a playground. I'm like, wow. Like, because if I was in your position, literacy would be my number one thing. Literacy would be my number one thing. My number two thing would probably be something that they're safe. And I'm talking about intellectual, cultural, emotional, which means the adults have some type of educational, intellectual lobotomies about, so that their mindsets are not jacked up about the children. But literacy and, you know, uh, how children are viewed, right? Because that informs how you lesson plan, how you build culture, how you create relationships, whether or not you're disciplining a child. It's like mindsets matter most. He insisted, no, playgrounds is going to be my thing. Like, and so when I tell you, like, they don't know shit about educating children,
Mhm.
about the
Mhm.
history
Mhm.
of, black communities like starting schools, starting things. I talk about Nathaniel Sasa all the time because to me, if that was still around, charter space would be the space that it would have survived.
Hmm.
And so that's why I am like absolutely vehement. I'm absolutely vehement about parents. And again, I agree with you. I don't care if it's charter, if it's homeschool, if it's like whatever, if it's moving, whatever the parent has access to, and making sure that they have access to where they think their child can fit. And I don't, I just get sick of like this one, viewpoint that as they don't, telling parents this is the best option for you, even though I'm not exercising it. Like to me, that is just like the height of hypocrisy. Like just shut up, mind your business, and get out the way. Right? Like to me,
Yeah.
that I mean, that's like, that's what's just so frustrating to me because they don't have answers. It's the Rufos of the left. And again, yes, more money, and then what? Because
I want people to
if you
hear this
close this
too.
seven
Like, I
percent
want people
down,
to hear
go
this on
ahead.
the left.
Mhm.
This point that you just, because we have to keep drilling this home. There are some progressives, college educated and smart people who are so superior in their attitude when they think about a Christopher Rufo or the
Oh yeah.
QAnon people or the Marjorie Taylor Greene or whoever is in and Lauren Boberts of the world or whatnot. When they think
I
about
don't know
them,
who these people are you naming, but
this
I
is
know
this is
Rufo. But so if they're
this
in
is
his
that
ilk, then
right
all right, yeah,
cabal. For some progressives, when they think about that group of people, there's such a sense of superiority of like,
right.
well, at least I'm intellectually superior to them and smart, blah, blah. They don't realize that when it comes to education, they start talking about things like charter schools or whatnot. They are the education equivalent of QAnon. They think of everything in terms of a conspiracy and a grand larceny of values of the America that they know and want and whatnot in some ways. And they start to froth on that stuff. Over time, they start sounding really, really, really crazy. Because if you're a person like me, arguing with a professor at her high level, and she's got all these neoliberalism, blah, 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 talking points or whatnot. And I'm a person who has, for the last decade or more, has walked in schools and visited and looked people in the face and talked to students and parents in different kinds of schools, in all these different kinds of schools, and have seen real human stories. They seem so disconnected from reality. The whole Edanon kind of like cabal sounds so disconnected from reality when they talk about charter schools. Today, I just tweeted like I was just exasperated with someone. I was just like, calm down. Just calm down. You sound stupid. Like, and here's the thing. Randy Weingarten tweeted out today about these regulations. And I tweeted back to her and just basically said, you started a charter school and it failed miserably. Obviously, you're not the expert, right? On what good charting
Facts.
should be and good
I wonder how
charting
many people know that
legislation
though,
stuff.
right? Like how many people know
Very
that
few
kind of
people
thing, right?
know that. They know that very few people know that several of the people that come at us in their cabal are actually failed charter school leaders, people who couldn't get the job done. These are not the people. Carol Burris herself worked in a very white school district that didn't educate kids of color, like 1 or 2, 3% of color. For her to talk about segregated schools in charters, segregated white flight charters, when she was in a white flight district, a whole ass white flight district, is the height of liberal, paleo liberal hypocrisy. For
Mhm.
Diane Ravitch, who was a private school student, to make herself kind of like the patron saint of all things public schools is just like the height of liberal. This is the equivalent on the left of QAnon. These people are ridiculous. And here's my challenge. I'll just stop with this. Here's my challenge. Instead of always beating up on charter schools, the charter laws work for everyone. So if you know how to do it better as educators, as union educators, I would think that, listen, the Minneapolis Federation of Teachers authorizes charter schools in Minneapolis. So I would think that you would want to start schools to show everybody what you can do. Show people what you can do as educators with as union educators. Stop trying to stop people from doing what they know to do and start showing us something. You got educators, you have a union, you have infrastructure, you have resources, you have time. Obviously, you got time because you on online all day long trying to figure out ways to sabotage charter schools. Put that energy into showing us something. Get your own charters, start your own schools. But you know what has happened when they have tried to do that? They have proven to us why the best that they can do is to always attack other people who are
Mhm.
trying to do something educationally. Because when they do it themselves, we have a non charter law in Minnesota. It's called the self governed schools, where educators in a district, not a charter, in a district can start their own schools within the district as district schools.
Mm.
And it has failed miserably because when they try to do it themselves, they don't succeed. And that should be everything we should know about this discussion. You should not be running up to the White House working with the president on regulations for charter schools when you very clearly can't educate kids yourselves. You've proven it time and time again. You can educate Carol Burris. You can educate the white families and white kids of your bedroom communities where you control everything, and you miseducate the 3 or 4 or 5% of black kids that you have in your midst. That's your venue. Stay home. Stay
Mhm.
home, sis. Stay home. Work with your people, right?
Yeah.
Don't get in this lane.
I mean, and part of the problem is, the pillow talk that's happening with the president. Is Randy's in she's having pillow talk, right? Like she's good friends with the first woman, and that's whispered. Like some of that is there. Like their besties is infiltrating all of it. So you got Carol so that conference that you talked about in Philadelphia with Carol Burrows, Diane Ravage as the keynote, and talking about and not one mentioning about like actually black children achieving. How do you have a educational conference and not talking about the horrific outcomes that we have in Philadelphia, the murder rate, and I guarantee you the youth who are like again burning the village because they couldn't feel the warmth of the not only community but the schools themselves, right? And all of that and how connected that is. Not a mention of it. You looked at the agenda, you look at the schedule. Like, wait a minute, when y'all talking about black children and what's actually happening in the schools, y'all should be looking for new solutions. But then they're also so far removed from black history and black folk, no matter what schools black people were going to or what they and study after study, survey after survey, anecdotally as well as research based, black families are like, nah, like I want to be able to choose where my child goes. I want some options besides where you're going to demand I go based off of my zip code, right?
Mhm.
So they want more of that. And you look at the black history of like just starting schools and like what that means as you open the show up. But ultimately the question is, if 7% of schools, which are charters, if they just vanish, will black achievement improve?
Mm,
Is that what's happening? Like, is that because ultimately, like for me,
mm,
like I don't have time for the bullshit. Like, it's just like
mm,
I wanted to jump into education because I felt like there was a level of self efficacy. I didn't have to play games. It was me, the children, the families, the school. What was I going to do? What was my level of self efficacy to try to improve the conditions that was going on? And ultimately, that means that I'm improving the conditions that I'm going to be in, right? Because I'm part of the
mm,
community, right? Like
mm,
my success will be your success will be my success. It's kind of that direct line. It's the closest thing you can get, right? I always talk about the purest form of activism is teaching black children well, right? If these charters go away, tell me how it's going to improve. Like, fine, make them disappear tomorrow. Do the
mhm.
what's the boy off of Marvel? You snap your fingers, they're gone.
Thanos.
Thanos, do the Thanos thing.
Yeah,
Tell
yeah,
me how that's going to improve teaching and learning.
yeah. I mean, to this point, you just said something that I think needs an answer. So, do you have the right to that self efficacy when you say, I was frustrated with the outcomes? I got a good education in a Black school that was built for me. And as an adult, I was frustrated with what was going on for my community. The purest form of activism is actually teaching kids. So, that drives you to want to do this work. So, you show up like black men should show up to do whatever you can. You go into a charter school and start developing a pedagogical scheme that gets young urban kids to good, gets them. to learning. I guess the question is, do you have a right to that self-efficacy? Because the people who are arguing about whether or not charter schools should exist or not, they don't answer that question. They just skip by it.
Oh
Like,
yeah. And this is why it would end up. This is why, like, and I'm just like, Chairman Fred and his father. They used to talk about, like,
mhm,
elevate the inconsistencies, right? And like, and
mhm,
often they
mhm,
would want to put me in a box, and I'm like, but no, like, you can't put me in a box. Yeah, I am in the charter, and you know what? I was in the traditional system because sometimes they meet you and they just assume you grew up in the charter. No, dog, I was actually in a traditional school longer than I was here. Now what? Well,
mhm, mhm,
you may not. Nah, bro, you're not going to out black me. And let me tell you, the
mhm,
three generations of activism, in my family. Like, nah, like, you're not going to out black me and talk, like, nah. Well, no, I actually grew up overseas, and I saw international studies too. So now, right, like, over and over and over again, they're trying to, like, I'm just like, nah. I'm doing this because I believe this is a lever, this is an avenue, and it is my choice to work here, just like it is family choice to be here.
mhm,
And it's
mhm,
like, what was that old rap song? And most of these are, a lot of times, it was like old white women who were professors, right? And
mhm,
so, what, I forget who was that rap song. It's like, mind your business, lady, right? Like, in that one song. Like, that's what I would say. Like, you're sitting here pontificating about something that you're so far removed. When have you been around black children?
mhm,
Even the people that you send to work here, their only experience with black people are in schools.
mhm,
You got 80% white folks, most of them, their only experience with black people are actually black people's children
mhm,
within the parameters of a school building. That's
mhm.
their only experience. They know nothing. You know nothing. That's
Yeah,
what we should say. You know nothing,
you
Jon
know nothing.
Snow. We
That
should
should be
just
their
call them all
T-shirt.
Snow. Miss Snow. You know
Yeah.
nothing, Miss Snow.
Well, let me just because I had put up earlier the truth about charter schools, and I feel like some people coming to this and listening to this conversation that we have had so far might be like, "Well, that's not my truth about charter schools or whatnot," and they might have something different to say. So I'm gonna like you can tell me your truth, but I'm gonna tell you my truth about charter schools, and then I want your response. Like
Mm,
you tell me what you think. Okay. Um, we've already talked about the positive, the net positive. If you are in the long line of Black intellectual thought, your view of charter schools, I think, should be within that long line of political thought. Charter schools aren't some aberrant kind of side policy outside of all of the other things that you're doing to liberate the kids, to continue the fight against your country to be free. And that fight has required us to use every tool at our disposal, whether it's a kind of school or a kind of pedagogy or a way of teaching. We have to fight around these things around whether direct instruction is good or not, whether phonics are good or not for us in terms of outcomes. Do
mhm,
they get us reading and learning and achieving and then graduating? And once we graduate, get us into the American economic mainstream. Those things are part of our political portfolio of strategies to free ourselves. And charter schools, like anything else, is like a hammer or a screwdriver or whatnot in a chest full of other tools that we might
mhm,
use.
mhm,
We don't want it taken off the table, and we don't want it lifted up as if it's the savior of all saviors.
mhm,
It's one tool in our political freedom. But with that, all the tools across the board have a 50-50, 60-70, whatever type of thing of being good and bad. So you can use democratically elected school boards for good, and you can use them for bad. You can use a magnet school for good, and you can use it for evil. You can use a traditional school district for good, and you can use it for sorting kids into very different career tracks so
mhm,
that some go and rule the world and others go and work for the people ruling the world. So none of these things are perfect. When it comes to charter schools specifically, there's some I like more than others. Culturally affirming charter schools that are come out of the communities that they serve, that are for the people that they serve, and are part of the self-determination of those people, for me, are a non-brainer or no-brainer, non-questionable thing, entity. I will fight you if you come for those charter schools specifically. culturally affirming charter schools that come out of the communities that they intend to serve, that are
Mhm,
part of the self determination of those people. Fight me all day because we're going to fight about those.
mhm,
Charter schools that don't have that criteria but still do a good job, or still have our people's support in some way, meaning people are enrolling in them and they're seeing some advantage to it or whatnot. I'll still fight for those because people are choosing them. We have a new breed of charter schools that are hyper white nationalist, and in some cases, white nationalist religious charter schools that are starting to come online or whatnot. We have some charter schools that are complete and absolute scams from day one and aren't teaching anybody anything. We
mhm,
have some bad actors who run charter schools or whatnot. I won't fight for those.
mhm,
That's not me. So I'm not for charter schools. I'm for self-determination. And those are two totally different things. So that's my truth about charters. I will fight you for the first two groups. I won't fight you for the last group of those. We'll fight together against
mhm.
or about those groups. All right. What do you think?
Listen, I would agree with you 100%. It's about, particularly schools that come out of communities. You talked about years ago about Brownsville. What would that be today? That would likely the avenue that they would likely try to get, I could imagine, would be in charter, in the charter space. People who are, worked with Dr. King, and I forget the brother's name, he talked about even Dr. King with his stance on the intellectual development of a child. If that culturally affirming a charter school that was created for black children, he would likely be on there. Malcolm, we know he said right from the beginning in the 60s, told New York Department, give up 30% of these schools in the New York City and turn them over to us. Sounds like kind of sounds like a charter to me.
Mhm.
Third, right from the rip, Malcolm X said, New York City Department of Education, give up 30% of these schools because you don't know what the hell you're doing. You're destroying our black children. Give them over. Turn them over. If we look at what how you look at like what's the currency in 1900, and then what would that be worth today?
Mhm.
What would that statement of Malcolm X be worth today? What would it mean? What would that translation look like and sound like? It would be a culturally affirming, independent, community-based school. And so 100%. And anywhere where the races gather, and that's the thing, like they're going to gather everywhere. Like to think that the rabid racists only gather in charter sector is baloney. Like they gather in the traditional sector just as much, if
Mhm.
not
Mhm.
even just as much, a lot more.
Mhm. Mhm.
That's their domain. And I'm gonna tell you, like, ain't no way in hell 80% organized group of white folks going to tell me what to do with in my community.
Mhm.
Ain't no way in hell.
Mhm.
You're going to tell me and anybody all the black folks that you found your blackness in college or afterwards. You grew up in a suburban or school, and you look at that's the traditional sense. When I talk about traditional schools, and you're talking, no, that ain't the traditional experience for black communities.
Mhm.
That ain't the. I got two sets of most everybody has two sets of grandparents. My two sets of grandparents had 8 children combined.
Mhm.
You're talking about the 1930s to the 50s. Not a single one of them went to the the school that the government said they had to go. That the district said that they had to go because that was their zip code. Not a single one of them.
Mhm.
8.
Mhm.
And I'm not talking about like 2000 or 2020 or since charters arrived. No, this is generationally. And so them exercising, I'm continuing the traditions of my people, self-determination to determine. And you know what? Damn it, I want options when I am. It's hard to be self-determined if you have no option, right? Like you're just like, I'm self-determined. I'm just instead of walking this way up the block this way, I'm going to go out this way and go around and go to arrive at the same place. That's not what self-determined. I will support and follow the traditions of the founders of Nathal Musasa,
Yeah.
the founders of Sankofa and Imhotep Charter School, two Afrocentric schools in, here and elsewhere. I'm going to follow the traditions of those founders, those heroes, those people who began a school thinking of the Black intellectual development of our children and the future of our community. That's why they started those schools. And some
Yeah.
of that, yeah, it could be in all types of, again, sectors. But yeah, I'm gonna fight for them tooth and nail. No matter what.
And that sounds like your truth about charter schools.
That's my truth.
Yeah, I would love for the people who don't agree with us who are watching this, I would love a better dialogue that is fact based, that does take into account the lived experience and the histories that we're coming from, and not the stereotypical conversation that is based upon a lot of cartoons of where we're coming from, right? Like that doesn't get to the heart of anything. When you disagree with us, you're not just disagreeing with you and me. You're disagreeing with millions of families and students, right? Who obviously are not doing this for political purposes. They want something different than you want. So I don't understand why you can't even have the conversation without jumping to the Edanon type of like language and whatever. Calm down, be reasonable people. Stop being ideological and overly political when it has an impact on the lives of the oppressed, the lives of people who have been historically marginalized. You don't get to just um, um, dismiss their lived experience and give yourself license to do so because you found the 5 or 6 Black people who agree with you, who want us all to be stuck in the same system. Uh, if you had a great time in traditional public schools, good. I have 3 kids in traditional public schools right now, and, and I don't have, like, a ton of options, but it is the best option for us right now. I don't want one kind of thing. I want options. I want the ability to make a decision and determine pathways for my kids. So I don't know why we just can't even have that conversation. I would also say, as a challenge to the people who are anti-charter, who are pro-traditional public schools, start if you really believe in traditional public schools, which I get why people do and would. If you really believe in it, you shouldn't spend all of your time trying to defeat competing proposals or options. You should spend your time making your leaders be creative and innovative and show what they can do. You have entire districts that have big ass budgets, lots of infrastructure, lots of people, and for years they have had no new ideas in terms of how they're going to use their magnet schools, their magnet systems, how they where and how they do their special programs, and what kind of opportunity they're creating with kids for kids in their cities, in their places. Like, where is the big vision? Where's your big idea? Like, where's your big new idea? Saying no to something
Playgrounds,
else can't be a big idea. Would you say, Sharif?
playgrounds,
Playgrounds.
playgrounds, different type of chairs. A clinic in the back of the school.
Clinics are, I mean, like community schools, they would say, I'm sure they would say that community schools is their new big idea. But community schools, I have said it oftentimes, I'm interested in it, but oftentimes they have been health clinics where no one can teach. That can't be the thing. Like, I want all kids to have eyeglasses when they need them. I want them to have dental
Yeah,
care when they
absolutely.
need it.
I
I
want them to
want
be
them
able to
to have
read too,
health
right?
care, sexual reproductive health or whatever they need. Because kids come to they come to schools in a lot of different ways without resources. So that's great. But still, you need a bigger idea than that. Number one, how many of those are you going to have? Who's the superintendent that's going to do it? Get it going. Make it happen. Stop fighting things that you don't like. Start producing for the world. Show the world what you can do.
And then recognize that the only real tradition, I don't even like using the term traditional school, but we use it just to help people understand. The only real tradition in the public school system is anti-blackness,
Oh, damn.
anti-brownness,
Oh, damn.
anti-immigrant. That's the tradition. That's what the tradition that our kids are in and continue to be in. So any opportunity, and you know what, and if you're and I'm like you, my children right now are in traditional schools, traditional neighborhood schools, and I'm still going to fight for my right opportunity and anyone else in my communities if they have other interests. and they have the right to have quality options beyond,
Mm.
not just people with means, anybody. And I will continue to fight because to me, that's what service is. It ain't, oh, well, I went to this and so I'm fighting. And most of the people, the politicians in Philly and elsewhere, when you ask them where did they go, where did their children go, they went to the toniest school. They went to the most restricted entrance. They went through the gate with the most restrictions, and that's where they sent their children.
Mhm.
But yet they're the experts on everybody else. To me, that is it's absolutely ridiculous. So,
They should
uh,
stop being gatekeepers. Well, this is an amazing conversation. This has been a great charter school week. I actually applaud the work of the people who made it possible this week for there to be so much focus on the families, focus on the students and the educators in charter schools. Charter schools aren't some foreign entity. All entities involve people, and you can't take the people out of the policy. The people who came to Washington, D.C. this week need to be heard,
mhm.
and the people who are against them need to be either addressed or rebuffed or helped to be successful elsewhere. And that's my final word this week. This has been another episode of Freedom Friday. It is Friday and you are still not free, but hopefully you're freer after this hour that you have had with me and Sharif El Mekki. We look forward to seeing you guys next week. We're going to have, I think, an important guest next week. There might be some controversy on the show next week. So I just go put that out there. Folks, share the show with your friends and family and come back next week for that controversy. And we will see you then. Have a great weekend. Do your best.